In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And boom, we're back, Taylor. It is Wednesday. We are recording again. Tomorrow's Thanksgiving. We want to give thanks for you, the listener, me, the host, Taylor, the host,
and me.
Sweet, and Taylor. Mostly Taylor. Sweet. Welcome to Doom to Fail, the podcast where we cover a true crime or historical event. I'm Farz, joined here by Taylor. It is Wednesday. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, but we're an evergreen show, so I was going to cover a Thanksgiving topic, but decided not to because we are evergreen. So we're not doing that. We're doing something else.
I don't know. I feel like you could have done that. I did Napoleon, and the movie's coming out today.
Should we cancel recording and just...
I'm just saying, there are no rules, so I just don't want you to feel like you're beholden to any rules that we made up.
We're just like Outback Steakhouse. No rules, just right.
We've definitely said that before, so perfect.
Yes, exactly. So today, Taylor, I'm going to be drinking rum because we, much like your story, are going to be focused on islands that are owned by the Spaniards.
All right.
Cool, right?
Yeah.
So this story is a little bit unique. Because it kind of falls in line with like disasters and true crime and kind of all the kind of come in mixing together. So the topic I'm going to be covering is the deadliest aviation accident in history. Have you ever heard? Do you know which one is the deadliest one in history?
Is that the one with the Pan Am plane?
Yes.
Yes, I love this one.
Of course, I knew you would know.
In a terrible way. Of course, I've spent hours Googling plane crashes.
Yeah, I think I watched this one while I was on a plane and was like, man, I do not look like the kind of person that should be watching this. Like, I'm the wrong shade.
Oh my gosh, the person behind you was like, oh my God, what the hell is
What
happening?
the fuck is this guy doing? One time, Taylor, I was on a plane and I had these cords in my my satchel that has my laptop in it. So I like the laptop charger, a phone charger, the headset charger, all this shit that was in there. And this like 60-year-old like Texan, like super Southern Baptist white woman was like behind me, and I started pulling these cords out, and the look on her face, like she was fucking terrified. It was incredible. I was like, man, what must it be like to go through life like this? Like,
Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you. I'm sorry that America is racist.
well, it was one example, but I'm sure a lot of people have had that same thought and just didn't express it the way she did. Just fucking sheer absolute terror. It was awesome. Another time, you know what? I'm not going to tell that story yet. I'm going to save some of the intrigue for later on. But
I'm excited. This is one I've definitely thought about doing as well. So I'm excited to hear from you.
Seriously?
Yeah, because it's such a crazy story, and I think that you're gonna get into it. But it's one of those things where like 7,000 crazy things go wrong.
Yes.
In ways that you wouldn't expect. Yeah.
Yes. So this is called the Tenerife Disaster. And I am going to, I wrote here that like I made like a little side note about how much I fucking hate musicals. And then I started putting this into a 3-part act and was like, why do I keep doing acts when I hate musicals? But anyways, we'll carry on.
Well, I think a lot of plays have musicals, or plays have acts, not just musicals, but
I kind of don't like plays either.
Why? Is it because you feel embarrassed? Because sometimes you feel embarrassed at the people on stage.
It's just like, how is this better than a Jerry Bruckheimer movie?
It's just different. Whatever. Let's talk about that later.
We'll have another.
But it's a good way to organize a story, is what we're getting to. So that's fine.
We'll have another episode where we just debate musicals versus Jerry Bruckheimer.
I used to not like them, and then I feel like maybe we should have another lazy Sunday, and I'll make you watch Oklahoma.
One day.
Because that sounds fun. Yeah.
So the three acts to my story are number one, the setup. Basically, like you said before, this accident required a ton of pre-existing conditions to occur before it happens. So the setup's kind of important.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the accident. Then you have kind of a breakdown of the causes, essentially. And I'm going to do a little bit of an epilogue to this one about where things currently stand with the state of aviation safety, because we are about to head down a very slippery slope, which is good for
I'm
people to
super
know.
excited because I'm definitely going on a plane in a few weeks. So
I know. I thought
I'll
about
see you
that
in North
too.
Carolina. Yeah.
You might not. so,
Jesus Christ.
so getting dark here. So the date we're talking about is March 27th, 1977. Two planes were making a trip to the Canary Islands, and the two planes were KLM 4805. KLM is a Dutch passenger carrier. It's basically their version of American Airlines. And this plane was flying from Amsterdam with 14 crew and 235 passengers. Then you have Pan Am 1736. That one originated that day out of LAX before it stopped at JFK in New York before making its way across the Atlantic, carrying 380 passengers and 16 crew. Both of these planes are 747s. 747s are the biggest planes. Well, no, actually, the Airbus A380 is now the biggest plane in the world. But for like 45 years, this is the biggest plane. This is the hump one, the one that has a hump in the front of it. So,
Like two stories,
yes, they're
right?
two stories.
Okay.
Both planes had exceptionally well-trained and qualified pilots. I mean, I'm saying all this because there's a reason for it. Like, just so everybody knows.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
this was not like, somebody gave the joystick to like a 10-year-old in the plane crash. Like, that's not what we're talking about here.
Which
So,
happened in one of the other ones that I've researched.
we got to talk about that one after this then. But
Okay.
both these crews were incredibly well trained. So the KLM pilot in particular is going to become relevant later on. That captain, the one in charge, was a guy named Jacob Van Zatten. And Van Zatten was KLM's main flight instructor for pilots who were trying to get certified on the 747. In fact, the people that were on the plane with him, the co-pilot, was certified by this main pilot, Van Zatten. He was
Mm-hmm.
also on all of KLM's advertisements. Like, he was the
Mm-hmm.
face of the brand from the pilot's perspective, essentially. Both planes were on their way to an island in the Canaries called Las Palmas to land at the airport there, which was basically, it was just a normal airport, multiple runways. They were used to receiving a lot of traffic, a lot of international traffic, a lot of jumbo jet traffic. So that was the idea. That was what they're trying to
Mm-hmm.
do. So around 1 p.m. on this day, there was a terrorist group that's got to learn acronyms because this is a horribly, horribly long name. So the terrorist group was called the Movement for the Independence and Autonomy of the Canary Archipelago. It's like,
It's
come on,
long. It's long.
like, let's get it
It's not
together.
catchy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
call yourself the Canaries. That's even cooler and darker. You wear masks,
that
you'll
is
be
cool.
cute.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So these guys called the airport authorities in Las Palmas and told them there was a bomb in the terminal and that they had 15 minutes before it exploded. The airport evacuated, and as promised, 15 minutes after that call, a bomb did explode at a floral shop that was in the terminal, which injured 8 people, and they had to shutter the airport. They're like, for some reason, they thought that there was another bomb on site, but long story short was they ended up saying, no more inbound traffic, we're vacating everybody from the terminal, and that was basically it. So
Mm-hmm.
these two planes that were about to land at this airport that just had this bomb explode started circling the airport, and the air traffic controllers in Las Palmas were like, just divert. Like, there's another island 74 miles away called Tenerife. They have an airport
Mm-hmm.
there. Go land there because we have no idea how long it's going to take for this to open. If you keep circling, you might run out of fuel and crash anyways. So,
Totally. We've seen the Die Hard too.
yeah,
You know.
exactly. Well, I
Yeah.
haven't, but you have.
Mm-hmm. That's what happens in Die Hard too.
There you go. Thank you. So Tenerife is, like I said, it's another island in the Canaries, owned by Spain. Like, kind of the synchronicity between our stories there. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, they have this one airport in Tenerife. It's called Los Rodeos, and this was a regional airport. So this was like a puddle jumper airport. Like, I remember when I went to Fiji, And when you fly into Fiji, you land at the main, like the biggest island in Fiji, and that's kind of like the central hub. But Fiji has like 300 islands, so you go to most of them. And what you get on to go there is a absolutely terrifying experience where it's just you and like one other person and the pilot is just like has coffee stains all over them, and they're using papers to like navigate where they are. Like it is a nightmarish experience. I've had it once before, but that's the kind of traffic that was meant to suit Los Rodeos, the airport that's on Tenerife. But this day, they found themselves trying to host these two, the Pan Am and the KLM flight, as well as three other wide body jets, other 747s. And because of that, there was not a ton of space to taxi. There was not a ton of space at the terminal or on the runway itself. So for this part, I wrote down I'm going to use my hands to paint you a picture, Taylor, but we're not on screen, so you're going to have to use your brain.
Okay.
So I'm going to articulate it. So I'm going to tell you what the layout was of the runway and taxiway at Los Rodeos, okay? So picture a rectangle sitting down lengthwise on its side.
Like a runway.
Much like a runway.
Got it. Pictured.
The bottom of that rectangle is the runway. It's a nice big runway. The top of the rectangle is the taxiway where the terminal is and where you go to kind of just get off the runway and go to the terminal, right? Between the taxiway and the runway, between the top of the rectangle and the bottom of the rectangle, there are 4 off ramps connecting the two. And we're going to refer to these as exits. So exit 1 is connects the two in a straight line. So basically, if you're trying to go on or off either one of them, you take a 90-degree turn either way. Make sense? Exit 2 and 3, those connect the taxiway and the runway at a backslash angle. So that if you're at a small regional public joining plane, you can exit halfway or so down the runway to the terminal. So basically, it's at the end of the runway, or like it's not even there. It's like closer to like halfway to the runway. So you just basically pull off. You do like a little 30-degree turn, and then you're off and you're at the terminal. Then you have exit 4, which is a forward slash angle. And it's set up this way so that if you don't have space to use the taxiway, 2 or more planes can follow each other down the runway. The trailing plane can take exit 4. The lead plane can go to the end of the runway and make a U-turn. That's the idea. Got it? Good. So, given where these 2 planes ended up parking once they landed in Tenerife, the KLM is the lead plane in this example, and the Pan Am is the trailing plane. The Pan Am didn't really want to be in the trailing plane spot because they were already cleared to take off and head back to Las Palmas ahead of the KLM plane, because the captain of the KLM plane decided that he wanted to refuel at Tenerife as opposed to Las Palmas. So originally the plan was you land in Las Palmas, you refuel, and then he flies back to Amsterdam. Now he has to land in Tenerife, then Las Palmas, then Amsterdam. So he's like, fuck it, I'm just going to refuel here. It'll make it a lot easier. This ended up causing a delay about 35 minutes, and the Pan Am plane couldn't get around the KLM plane. So everybody was waiting for this KLM plane to get refueled. During this time, this 35 minutes, a fog starts settling in on the runway. The runway was already overpacked, and that day there was only 2 air traffic controllers working, and at this point, they really can't see anything that's going on the runway. Like it was visibility conditions that ordinarily means that you would never allow anybody to take off because it's just you can't see more. I forgot what it was. It was like 300 feet in front of you. If you can't see more than 300 feet in front of you, you can't take off, and they couldn't see 300 feet in front of them. In addition to that, there was no ground radar. So there was zero visibility of what was going on outside. So, Act 2, the accident.
Oh,
so 35 minutes passed, and the KLM was finally ready to kind of start going down the runway to taxi and to take off. Again, because the taxiway was packed full of planes at the terminal, everyone leaving Los Rodeos had to use the runway as the taxiway to get into position to take off. So the idea was the KLM, as lead plane, would go down the runway till it gets to the end, make a U-turn, and then go down the opposite direction of the runway to take off. The Pan
Hmm.
Am would follow the KLM down the runway, but obviously it needs to get out of the way, so it would take one of the exits I mentioned earlier to get out of the way and line itself up behind the KLM and then take off behind it. So
Hmm.
around 5 p.m. that day, the two planes set off on the runway with Pan Am being instructed to take exit 3. Exit 3 is the forward/exit. It was obvious, and I actually listened to and then read the cockpit voice recorders of this, which was totally harrowing. But
Oh my God.
on the voice recorder, you can hear that this crew is super confused as to like what exit they're supposed to take, and it makes sense for reasons I'll get to later why they were so confused. And it was interesting because like the air traffic controllers were fucking dicks about it. Like
Mm.
they're like being such jerks to the pilots. The pilots were asking them a ton. They're like, "You said 3, like 3, like wait, are you saying 1, 2, 3?" And like 1, 2, 3. It's like you know, like they're repeating it. Like they're so confused about this, and the air traffic controllers are like, "Fuck these guys!" Like they're just trying to be rude to us or something, and they were being really mean to them.
Were they
But
speaking in English?
yeah, English is the common language of all
Okay.
everything. So,
Yeah.
but I'll explain why they shouldn't have been jerks to them here in a minute. So,
Because they shouldn't have been jerks to them.
well,
But continue.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, okay. So basically, part of the reason why there was confusion was there was no markings on the exits. So you had to count
Mm.
the exit, but as you're going down the runway, you're also doing your takeoff checklist. So you have to run
Hmm.
through okay, this button is up, that button's down. You have to do all this shit. And on top of that, there's fog, so you can't really see the runways anyways. But in addition to that, it would become obvious that a plane of the size of a 747 would have been impossible to have done a forward/slash turn the way that they were asking for. It essentially looked like
Hmm.
a backward Z is how it would have looked. It would have been like 150 degrees. It would have been impossible to make the turn. And that's also part of the confusion. Like, what are you talking about? Like, how am I supposed to Are you
Hmm.
sure you're saying 3? Anyways, so 4 minutes after starting down the runway, the KLM gets to the very end and makes its U-turn and it radios to air traffic controllers to tell them that they're ready to take off. The air traffic
Hmm.
controller does what is basically standard procedure and tells them what their route is going to be once they take off. So here's this is a quote of what the air traffic controller says to the KLM plane.
Oh my
KLM
God, I'm trapped.
8705, you are clear to the Papa Beacon, climb to and maintain flight level 90, right turn after takeoff, proceed with heading 040 until intercepting the 325 radial from Las Palmas VOR.
I have no idea what the fuck that means.
You're right to not understand that. What should have been said after all of this was said was cleared for takeoff. That's the universal language used for. He said you're cleared to. He didn't say you're cleared to takeoff. So at the very beginning, he says you are cleared to Papa Beacon. He didn't say you're cleared to takeoff. And
Was he cleared for takeoff or no?
he was not cleared for takeoff. But at that
But he said the
point,
word "you're cleared." Okay.
yeah, at
Ugh.
that point, the pilot, Van Zetten, in Dutch says, "We're going," and you hear the engines spool up on the plane. On that part, so we do hear on the KLM side the air traffic controller saying okay, but due to interference on the radio, what he was actually saying was okay, stand by for takeoff. I will call you. So the pilot says we're okay, we're going, and the air traffic controller says okay, and then it's just static because it's interference. But what he was saying was okay, stand by for takeoff. Right.
Got it.
So by this point, the Pan Am was still on the runway, having gotten confused between exit 3 and 4. At 5:06, I pulled this all off the actual the transfer to the flight data recorder. So
Hmm.
it goes by in seconds. So this is all within the 5:06 time frame. It's 5:06 p.m. But at 35 seconds, someone on the KLM flight inquires whether the Pan Am is cleared, but they don't press the issue. Like they're like wondering if the plane has been cleared of the runway yet. At the
And
41
they
second
can't they
mark,
can't see each other, right? Or they
can't see
can, but
each
like
other.
barely.
Well,
Okay.
So the 41-second mark is the first time anybody sees anybody. So the 41-second mark, 6 seconds after the engine starts spooling up, the Pan Am captain sees the lights on the landing gear of the KLM and realizes the plane in front of them is trying to take off in front of them. 2 seconds later, the KLM pilot realizes the Pan Am is in his way, and at this point, he's going approximately 161 miles per hour. And
Oh my God.
at that point, you can't brake in time. And so you
What
hear him
time
on
is it,
this
Farz?
is
Is it nighttime?
5:06, almost. It's 5:06
Okay.
p.m. And at this point, it's too late to brake. The captain says V1, which is what you do to kind of start. That means like you have no choice. You have to take off, and you pull back on the yoke, and to try and lift the nose of the plane up. At the 50-second mark, 6 seconds after he says pull up on the yoke, V1, you hear the collision on both voice recorders. So
Ugh.
what happened was when the Pan Am saw the KLM heading towards them, they applied full power and tried to steer the plane into the grass, get out of the way. They never found the exit. Like, even where the plane ended up
Right.
landing, it was never at the exit. When the KLM realized the Pan Am was in front of them, they tried to take off prematurely, and they ended up scraping the bottom of the plane on the ground for about 72 feet. So they're trying to get up and going. The nose did clear the Pan Am. It was the engines in the landing gear that caught the plane lengthwise. So picture that. I mean, they're T-boning each other, right? Like, or well,
Yeah.
the KLM is
Well,
T-boning the Pan Am.
they're not face to face. It's T1ing it.
Yeah, they're T-boning it.
Okay.
Yeah. The KLM actually became airborne briefly before it crashed, and because they had filled the complete fuel tanks up, it just erupted into a massive fireball. Literally everyone on the KLM died. So 248 people died on the KLM, and 335 people on the Pan Am died. 61 people survived, plus one woman who didn't reboard the plane after it landed in Tenerife because she was like, fuck it, I don't want to go to Las Palmas anymore. In total, about 583 people ended up dying that day.
Oh my God.
So Act 3 is the causes. This is so interesting because, again, so many things have to come together. So there's a concept in aviation known as the Swiss cheese model, which sounds delicious. But really what it is if you line up a bunch of like slices of Swiss cheese, like you might be able to get through one hole, but the next slice will stop you. Or if that one doesn't
Right.
stop you, the third one stops you. And so aviation
Yeah.
security and safety is kind of built around this concept of the Swiss cheese model. And so as a result, if one thing goes wrong, usually it's not a big deal. Two things go wrong, three things, like most of the time it's not a big deal. It's only when a bunch of stuff converge, and that's what ended up happening in this situation. So let's go through the causes real quick. So first things first, terrorism. So apparently, God, the history's insane. So the Canary Islands had indigenous people there. And Spain invaded and made it Spanish territory. And so these natives were fighting back. I mean, we're calling it terrorism. Like, it was basically like a march against colonialism is really what it was. If they hadn't did what they did that day in Las Palmas, the planes would have presumably landed fine and everything would have been fine. Like, there wouldn't have been any issues. To their credit, they did say that they should not be blamed for this. I just love the idea of like a terrorist group having a PR firm be like, look, we look like assholes. We got to get ahead of this. Yes, we just set a bomb.
We had
off
nothing
an
to do with
airport.
this, you guys.
Yeah.
Which is true. Like, like it's exactly that. Like, it's so many things had to happen for this to happen. So it's not the terrorists' fault, but like they started it. But also,
They
it's
definitely
funny that they had to
started
say
it.
that.
Also, yeah, I'm glad we
I'm
have it
laughing
on
because I'm
tape.
gonna throw up.
I'm glad we have it on tape and it's being recorded.
Mm-hmm.
The other is weather. So the weather in Tenerife sucked. So the visibility, like I mentioned before, under any other circumstances would have violated air traffic regulations for them to take off in. But at that point, there was nowhere to put these planes. They were too big. There were too many giant fucking planes in a tiny, tiny airport. And so they had to be like, guys, just get out of here. Like, somehow get out of here. The other had to do with duty time regulations. So this is the amount of time a pilot or flight crew are allowed to work and be operational. So Currently, it sits at 8 hours for pilots and 10 for crew members. I had this exact same situation happen to me like a few months back when I was in DC, where like my flight kept getting delayed and pushed back, and by the time we boarded, a storm had came into DC, and they're like, we have to wait until the
Yeah.
storm passes, and then all of a sudden it's 30 minutes. And I'm like, dang, I can't fly. We won't land in time for me
Yeah.
to like be in an operational safety window. So the idea was that this pilot, Captain Van Zetten, he was in a rush. He was trying to get everybody over to Las Palmas so he could board up as quickly as possible and fly back to Amsterdam to be home that night. Um, because so much of this was based on his impatience. The fact that he wanted to refuel was based on his impatience. That slowed everybody down. The fact that he didn't listen for commands, that was impatience. And there's another concept I'm going to bring up here in a second. So the refueling part. So the runway at Tenerife is 10,203 feet. The KLM struck the Pan Am in the 5 to 6,000 foot mark of it. So like a little over halfway down the runway. A fully loaded 747 needs at minimum 7,200 feet to reach the speed it needs to take off. The amount of weight added to the plane when he decided to refuel in Tenerife as opposed to Las Palmas, about 32 tons. Fucking huge amount of weight, right?
Yeah.
The idea is that it is possible that if he had not refueled and he had the patience to just go to Las Palmas and do what he was supposed to do there and refuel there, that he would have had a light enough weight to have taken off and missed the plane. But even more critical, if he didn't do that, if he didn't refuel, he wouldn't have wasted 35 minutes before the fog came in and obstructed all the views. So that on its own could have prevented everything as well. The other one is a concept known as cockpit gradient. So junior cockpit crew on KLM had expressed concerns. They had asked and been like, is the Pan Am gone? Are we sure it's gone? But the other guy, Van Zandt, was so senior that nobody really listened to him. Or like they were like they didn't want to press the issue with him. He's like, if he says it's okay, it's okay. Like fuck what I know and what my instincts are telling me. I gotta listen to what this guy says. And this
like,
is
are you going to talk about this, Farz? I'm sorry, but
no.
that like KLM tried to call him to do PR after it.
Yeah. No, they didn't call him to do PR after it. The executive leadership team at KLM, when they heard about this crash, they're like, okay, we got to send people over there. Send Van Zandt. He's the most trained and qualified person. Like he was the one flying the plane. He's dead.
Yeah, like they couldn't have imagined that he was involved in it because they were like, he's our number one guy.
Yeah, exactly. So this is like such a crazy. So this is so common in aviation for some reason. So there was one story I read about a United captain whose landing gear it wasn't showing that it was in a locked position. So he kept circling the airport, basically trying to figure out how to get this thing to show that it's in a locked position before he lands. The crew, you could hear telling him like, we're running low on gas, we're running low on gas. They're kind of just hinting at it until the engines flamed out and they just fucking plummeted to earth. It was like everybody knew except the captain running out of the most basic essential.
Yeah.
So wild.
And like, why didn't like, I don't know. Did you also hear about in my research of plane crashes, which I've done a ton, how like there were a lot of plane crashes like in South Korea because the pilots were too polite?
Yeah.
Have you heard that?
Yeah, so that is part of again, there's so many different things came together. So the other part of it, yeah, to your example there, that is part of the reason why English became the primary language. Because so like in Farsi, for example, like there's ways of making language deferential and like super flowery. Right, like when you talk to your parents or you talk to someone in like a higher social status, whatever the fuck that means, like you're supposed to be like you don't just say like, "Hey, how you doing?" You're like, "The honor is all mine for being in your presence." You know what I mean? Like it's just over the top, fucking like super regal language, and because of that, you can't. There's no actual words for urgency because urgency isn't proper, you know, and so
right.
Korean, or I thought it was Korean or Japanese, whichever one, their language is like that. It's like Farsi, where it's just like they were so flowery, and it was like, hey, we're about to fly into a mountain, and they're like, your most excellent regal majesty, sir, with all due respect, all of a sudden you're fucking dead. Like,
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
that's part of the reason why English became the standardized language, because English doesn't have that. So,
Yeah, totally makes sense.
but now there is a thing called crew resource management, which is basically a management style saying that anybody inside the cockpit has equal power to challenge anybody else's opinions, and the captain
Hmm.
should listen. Look, it doesn't make any difference because like these are humans in human institutions, and people are just going to do what the fuck they're going to do, right? So like, yes, you
Hmm.
should like after this came out, after crew resource management as a concept came out and became part of pilot training, there's like another 300 plane crashes that happened because people didn't say anything. So like,
You're right. It didn't fix it forever.
yeah, you're not gonna fix humans like until the drones take over. Like, this is gonna keep happening.
Mm.
So overall, so the Spanish government took charge of the investigation. KLM and Pan Am sent people over there. There's a number of findings, in addition to the ones I just listed out, but overall, they blamed Captain Manzatin and KLM for the crash, saying he took off without emergency proper clearance. There's other things that came out around this, which was the standardization of other forms of language. So, for example, you can never use like now you can never use like colloquialisms like okay or Roger.
Hmm.
Like it has to be very very by the books. And in the end, KLM paid out what was then 110 million, what is today 553 million dollars to the families of the victims. What's really interesting, and
Ugh.
you should totally do this because I know this is like your up your alley. There's a podcast. So the New York Times has a podcast called The Daily, and on
Mhm.
September 5th, they, this is terrible. They released an episode. Uh, and the title of the episode is "Passenger Planes Nearly Collide Far More Than You Know."
Ugh.
Did you
I
hear
know. I
this?
think I feel like I've read the there's an article about it that was in like the Times or something. But yes, because it like and on the ground, right?
Hmm.
As
On the
well.
ground and in the air. So what they said was that based on some data that they collected for several teams, uh, for example, they found that there was about one per day, at minimum, one per day of what's called a close contact, or what the FAA refers to as skin to skin contact, which is airplanes basically touching skins, which is really, really bad. And that was not including the database controlled and documented by NASA, which includes 300 close calls so far this year. And this was done in September. So
Right.
300 in
Mhm.
9 months.
Oh.
Basically, long story short, was that in the 1980s, the air traffic controllers went on strike, and air traffic controllers are federal
Mm.
employees. And during this time, Reagan was president. Was in legally, it was considered illegal for them to not work, and so Reagan fired them all and hired new ones. So what ended up happening was because everybody got hired at the same time, everyone's now retiring at the same time, right? And
Hmm.
so there's a wave of mass retirements for air traffic controllers. And then when the FAA started ramping up hiring of air traffic controllers, they faced the next issue, which was COVID hitting. So basically, what ended up happening was that there wasn't enough people who were qualified enough to train and also man the booths of air traffic control. And so now you have
Hmm.
lesser trained, less qualified people in air traffic control, as well as not having as many as you need, anyways. So right now, there's about 10% less air traffic controllers and less trained air traffic controllers than you would actually want in operation. Only three
Hmm.
airports out of 313 in the United States are currently fully staffed and basically like doing what is expected of their job. So
So
yeah,
you're saying it's Ronald Reagan's fault?
basically it all boils down to Ronald Reagan. What's really interesting was they said something on this episode. They were like, it's funny because we usually do these episodes when something bad happens, but you're telling us like now we know something bad is going to happen. They called the FAA the Tombstone Agency because they're like they only take action after there's been a bunch of deaths, which is like kind of what they're
Oh,
seeing right now, anyways.
totally.
It's terrifying.
Cool.
I'll see you in New York, North Carolina.
You know, I used to be super scared on planes. Now I'm like just regular scared on planes. But like I feel like also, oh, I don't fucking care. You know, I'd rather go to Jay's wedding than not. And
The other
it's fine.
the other fun thing they mentioned was that because of COVID, all these airlines who were carrying these inflated captain salaries decided to furlough a shitload of them. And when
Oh
COVID
yeah,
came
for sure.
back and air transport came back, those guys all decided to retire. and so
Of
and so what
course.
they did was they were just like hiring these like 25-year-olds who were doing like regional flights to like manage these
Hmm.
giant airplanes. And so now you have inexperienced air traffic controllers, too few of them, and also inexperienced pilots. So that Swiss cheese model is kind of coming to kind of a chaotic end conclusion here.
Honestly, it's a miracle that that we don't have one every day. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
they're doing pretty great, all things considered.
yeah, I agree.
Did you hear about that guy who's on shrooms who tried to down a plane the other day?
No.
There was a pilot who last podcast talked about it in their like side stories, but this dude was like off duty on a plane, but he had done shrooms like 3 days before and it was like messing with him and he thought he was in a dream, so he tried to like pull a lever that would like turn off the gas to the engine and then ended up having to like tie him down and he's like it was fine, but he is charged with like 180 counts of attempted murder or something. Like his life is fucking over because he was
Wow.
on shrooms.
I don't know.
And he
I
wasn't
mean,
working, but they shouldn't let him in like there.
yeah, yeah. That seems like a weird waste of shrooms. So, anyways, that's my story. Tenerife, the worst airplane accident in history. Two 747s, the worst case. I mean, the only thing that could be worse than that now would be like two A380s doing that.
Yeah, that is
So,
terrible.
but
It's
anyways,
terrible.
there we have it. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Remember, thank your pilgrims, thank the corn.
Yeah, that's almost exactly what you should do.
I don't.
If you want to, talk about go see Napoleon. If you are in a fight with someone in your family, you can just leave and go to the movies. It's a good day to go to the movies. Help your mom if she needs help in the kitchen, and have a good time.
Also, just don't talk politics. Like it's so easy. It's so easy. Like when I mean, I don't know, Taylor, like when we were kids, like talking about politics wasn't normal. And so if you have a crazy uncle or a crazy in-law, just like don't talk about it. Like it's so easy.
I know. I feel like I just get a little worried that they might like one off something like trans people aren't real, and you'd be like, oh my God, just pass the stuffing, But um, if
Whenever
everybody
you
agrees to it, fine. But
or
everybody has
if
to agree to it.
or if you hear that, all you do is say, pass the stuffing. That's it.
Does anyone have any shrooms?
You are not
I'd
going to
like to
change your
not be here
family
for
members.
this.
You're not going to change everybody's mind. They're not going to change your mind. Just keep
It's true.
peace and move on with your lives.
It's true.
So
Be nice to your mom. Cool.
that is it.
Thank you, Farz. I love that story because it's absolutely bananas and scary, and so many little things happened, and it's just a whole thing.
Oh, there is several episodes. Seconds to Disaster and Mayday they're both free to watch on YouTube, and they do really cool reconstructions of what this looked like when it happened. And so YouTube at
Hmm.
Tenerife, just do Tenerife plane, and it is the number one thing that's going to pop up.
And we hope you're okay after you do that.
I wonder what Mind or Midjourney is going to come up with for this one.
I'm scared. I'm gonna
I
ask
know.
it, but I'm nervous. Maybe it'll say no. I hope it says no, but we'll see.
We'll see. But yeah, thanks, Taylor.
Thanks so
We
much, Farz.
remember everyone. Doom to Fill at Doom to Fill Pod. Write to us at Doom to Fill Pod. Or hold on. Write to us. Yeah, write to us at Doom to Fill
doomtofillpod
Pod
at
at
gmail.com.
gmail.com.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Sweet.
And please, yes, follow, tell your friends. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Farz. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.